The French Revolution set Europe ablaze. It was an age of enlightenment and progress, but also of tyranny and oppression. It was an age of glory and an age of tragedy. One man stood above it all. This was the Age of Napoleon. I'm Everett Rummage, host of the Age of Napoleon podcast. Join me as I examine the life and times of one of the most fascinating and enigmatic characters in modern history. Look for the Age of Napoleon wherever you find your podcasts.
I'm Jeffrey Rosen, President and CEO of the National Constitution Center. A few years ago, learning about the forgotten meaning of the pursuit of happiness changed my life. When the founders wrote that famous phrase in the Declaration of Independence, they meant an ongoing commitment to self-improvement and lifelong learning. This discovery inspired me to write a book, and in my new podcast, I explore the founders' lives with the historians who know them best. Plus, filmmaker Ken Burns shares his daily practice of self-reflection. Join me for Pursuit, the Founder's Guide to Happiness.
Welcome to Ben Franklin's World, a podcast about early American history with Liz Covart. The study of history is key to understanding who we are and how we can affect a better future. Ben Franklin's World will introduce you to historical people and events that have impacted and shaped our present-day world. And now, here's your host, Liz Covart.
Hello, and welcome to episode 12 of Ben Franklin's World, the podcast dedicated to helping you learn more about how the people and events of our early American past have shaped the present-day world we live in. Each week, we sit down with an historian to discuss their unique insights into our early American past so we can learn more about who we are and how we can affect a better future. Did you know that Americans undertook their first trade mission to China in February 1784? A mercantile partnership led by Robert Morse sent the Empress of China, a 360-ton Boston-built ship, to Canton, China, 1 month and 8 days after the Congress of the United States ratified the Treaty of Paris, 1783. Why did these merchants look so far east to secure a profitable trade? And why did they attempt such a venture not long after the United States secured its independence from Great Britain? In today's episode, Dane Morrison, professor of history at Salem State University and author of True Yankees, The South Seas and the Discovery of American Identity, helps us discover the answers to these questions and more as he leads us on an exploration of the early American trade with China. In today's episode, Dane will reveal why early American merchants looked so far east to secure profitable trade and so soon after the United States secured its independence from Great Britain, the logistics involved in undertaking a 6-month one-way voyage from the United States to China, and how the Hong merchants of China received the American traders who entered their ports. But first, if you haven't done so already, would you please rate this podcast? Your rating will help us keep Ben Franklin's World visible and findable for new people. To rate and review Ben Franklin's World, a podcast about early American history, just visit benfranklinsworld.com/iTunes or benfranklinsworld.com/Stitcher. Okay, let's get to our fascinating conversation with Dane.
With tidings and wisdom to share about our early American past, here is this week's special guest.
Joining us today is Dane Morrison, professor of history at Salem State University in Salem, Massachusetts. He is the author and editor of numerous essays and 6 books, including his newest book, True Yankees, The South Seas and the Discovery of American Identity. Like the Americans he studies, Dane is a true Yankee, a native New Englander who enjoys seeing the world through his research and writing. Welcome to Ben Franklin's World, Dane.
Thank you, Liz. It's a real treat to be here with you today.
So we have a really interesting aspect of early American history to discuss today. Early voyages to China. And your new book, True Yankees, The South Seas and the Discovery of American Identity, explores the voyages of 5 New Englanders who visited China between 1784 and 1840. Dane, how did you become interested in these early American travels to East Asia?
Well, Liz, I was raised as a Navy brat, and I spent my first 2 decades traversing the eastern seaboard of the United States, so from Portsmouth to Panama. This was necessarily the experience of an outsider, of one who doesn't quite belong to any place. So I became interested in the rather human struggle of people on the margins to find a place in the world, and in the ways in which outsiders try to reinvent themselves as conditions around them change. This curiosity brought me to graduate school at Tufts University and eventually to my first book, A Praying People, which was a study of the Massachusetts Indians and their struggle to adapt to their own new world of epidemic disease and Puritan invasion. When I came to Salem State College, I discovered the rich trove of journals and letters and ship's logs kept by captains and merchants and supercargoes who voyaged what they called eastward of Good Hope, beyond Cape Town and into the Indian and Pacific Oceans. And this trove is housed in the Phillips Library of the Peabody Essex Museum, so proximity was certainly a factor. I think I found that their retelling of their experiences, their writing of their experiences as the new people on the world stage was an important and rather neglected part of the American experience.
And Salem must be a really good place to investigate these things because as a colonial town, it was a port town, so it had a lot of sailors and people venturing to other parts of the world in it.
It was almost from inception culturally diverse and filled with people from Native Americans, of course, but it drew mariners from throughout the Atlantic community, something that's rather understudied, I think. So Salem was perfectly pitched both for voyages into the Atlantic and beyond the Atlantic, and Salem was perfectly pitched for me to write about that.
Of course, the first voyage to China from the United States doesn't leave from Salem, but New York City. And what has always surprised me about that voyage was how early it happened. So Robert Morris decides he wants to trade with China, and less than a year after the ratification of the Treaty of Paris, 1783, he funds a voyage. So can you tell us why Robert Morris and other merchants like him were focused on trading with China and not focused on trading closer to home after the American Revolution?
Well, they did try to trade with the familiar ports of Europe and the Caribbean at first. With the signing of the Treaty of Paris in November of 83, American merchants were sending ships to the familiar markets of the Atlantic and the Caribbean. Richard Key, a historian who has studied the Salem merchant Elias Haskett Derby, noted that Derby sent out 25 voyages through these waters, but found little profit. What happened was that the former allies of the nascent republic, Spain, the Dutch, the Portuguese, etc., France, reasserted their mercantilistic barriers at the end of the war. And, of course, Britain was not always as welcoming as they might have been. And so the trade barriers really wiped out any profits the Americans expected to make. I think to get at their motivations for sailing to the east, it's helpful to start with a document that I think is one of the most important and most neglected in early American history. And this is Lord John Sheffield's Observations on the Commerce of the American States. It was published in London in November 1783, virtually at the moment when the Paris Peace Treaty is being signed. And it's published amidst, in Parliament, in the newspapers, in the countryside, a raging debate over what they call the American question. That is, what should Britain's formal policy toward the former rebels be? Should it be a policy of revenge and retribution, or should they embrace reconciliation? In his observations, Sheffield calls for retribution and counsels that if Britain cannot defeat the Americans militarily, they could strangle the rebels economically, closing the Caribbean markets where American merchants had depended on the sugar, molasses, and rum of the West Indies. Well, by the end of the year, by early 1784, we read in the newspapers in Philadelphia and Boston and Charlestown the first reports of an economic downturn. This is going to blossom into a full-scale economic depression that renders the seaports stagnant. Meanwhile, as this is developing, a Dartmouth College dropout, a young fellow named John Ledyard, has just returned back to the States, back to Connecticut, where he was born. And he chronicles the third voyage of Captain James Cook around the globe. Turns out Ledyard did not participate in the American Revolution. He had been shanghaied by the Royal Navy and was exploring the world when other Americans were fighting the British. He's actually a Marine aboard a British ship. Anyway, he has just published his own book touting the profits to be made in the China trade. So you get this kind of push-pull phenomenon that lures Americans east.
That was a really good overview of why Americans go to China and seek trade with China. And I have read Sheffield's pamphlet there, and it really does reek of retribution, and it really feeds what the British are feeling, which is disappointment and anger over losing the colonies. So it's interesting that you say you think it's a underutilized and not well looked at document. But now that we've looked at why the Americans go to China, can you tell us how they go to China, about this first voyage taken by the Empress of China? What was it like, or what was it involved in making a trading voyage to China in the 1780s? What size ship did you need, and what kind of cargo did these early Americans take with them?
Well, you get a sense of what's involved, and you get a sense of their thinking about what's involved in the names that they give their vessels: the Experiment, the Enterprise, the Endeavor, alongside the Empress of China, the Sumatra, and the Hindu. Before the Revolution, you would have seen the harbors of New York and Charleston and Boston and Philadelphia crammed with a host of charming Betsies and charming Lydias, and during the War of Independence with Yankee rebels and Yankee lasses. But now, as they look farther east to what they call the Eastern Frontier, their experience is one of experimentation. And these early voyages were truly experiments, and getting into the mindset of the people who plan these voyages. This is how they think about it. They call these passages around the world trial voyages. They call the ships experimental vessels. So I guess at the beginning, we have to recognize that no one American merchant had the capital to fund a voyage to the east. Robert Morris in Philadelphia is not the only, but simply the first to get his plans in motion. He organizes a consortium of investors who had to coordinate their efforts to find the ships, the men, the cargoes that would chance the markets in these distant and strange ports. And so the voyage of the Empress of China was organized by Robert Morris in Philadelphia, but involved financing from merchants in New York and Boston. As for the ship, they buy the Angelica. It's a ship just off the docks, newly built in Boston. They refit her for this, what they think is an outlandishly long voyage, a typical voyage, merchant voyage across the Atlantic. Involves maybe 4 weeks to Europe and maybe 6 weeks back. This voyage is going to be at least 6 months to and 6 months from and 4 months in port, at least, is what they expect. So they refit the Angelica and they rename her the Empress of China. She is a full-rigged ship of some 360 tons, rather larger than a pre-revolutionary merchant ship, but absolutely dwarfed by the great hunking 1,200 and 1,400-ton Indiamen of the European East India companies. The officers and the crews, like Samuel Shaw, were veterans of the Continental Army and Continental Navy for the most part. They are young, they are often destitute, and they're desperate to find work. Like Shaw, many of them had served the entire 8 years of service in the Revolutionary War, and Congress was not particularly forthcoming with pay or the pensions that Congress had promised to veterans. In addition, many of them bear the wounds of battlefield. Shaw's partner, Thomas Randall, was wounded repeatedly in battle. A number of them, including the captain of the Empress of China, John Green, suffered confinement in the maw of British prisons. Some were aboard British prison ships here, or in the prisons, Fortin and Plymouth in England itself. The cargo, Morris and his partners had to improvise. The Empress carried the kind of diverse cargo that was common to pre-revolutionary voyages. She carried cordage and wine and lead, iron, and of course the currency of choice, Spanish pieces of 8 Spanish dollars. But this was an experimental voyage to the east, and so the Empress also carried 242 casks of ginseng gathered in the foothills of Appalachia.
Wow, 6 months to get to China. Did they stop at any ports along the way just to get a little bit of shore leave?
Oh, nice question. Later voyages would stop at the Cape of Good Hope. The Cape of Good Hope becomes a landmark. It becomes almost a kind of home point. This is a place where you replenish your food, especially your fruit, to prevent scurvy, fruit and vegetables. But it's also something we tend to forget. It's a place where they replenish water, because water actually spoils rather quickly on one of these voyages. But in this first voyage to the east, Captain Green makes an important strategic decision. He fears that if he lands at Good Hope, which is now controlled by the British, that they will find a way somehow to obstruct the voyage, to stop him. And so he bypasses the Cape, and he doesn't reach land until he touches at Dutch Batavia on the northwestern point of Java. So it's a long cruise, long, hot, humid cruise before they see another port.
So what happens when this crew of the Empress of China finally arrive at Macau in August 1784? What does Macau look like? How do the Chinese traders welcome them? And what were the first interactions like between these Chinese and American traders?
Oh, nice question, Liz. This is what I'm particularly interested in. I don't have a lot of interest in the economics. Other and better scholars like Jim Fichter have looked at that, and his Jim Fichter's book is So Great a Prophet, wonderful examination of the economics of the Indies trade. But I'm really interested in the experience. What was it like, as you asked, to be, 18, 19, 20, a young person from a new and disrespected nation to be traveling the world. And I'm particularly interested in how they wrote about their experiences. I think this print culture constitutes a genuine genre, a China trade literature, if you will. And I think this writing is particularly important in recapturing the American experience at this early moment in the life of the new nation. So, when we think about what was it like, what did Macau look like, what was the experience like, I often think back to Howard Carter's exclamation when he unearthed Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. He bursts out, he's asked by Lord Carnarvon, "What do you see?" And Howard Carter in awe just bursts out, "Wonderful things." Well, they saw wonderful things. The Empress arrives at Macau and Whampoa Reach. They arrived there August 28, 1784. It's been a long voyage. Imagine this. Imagine the autumn landscape of rural New Hampshire or Philadelphia or Boston or New York this Thanksgiving week. Imagine the sights and the sounds and the smells of the countryside as farmers hunkered down for a long winter in 1784 and inverted. Turn the whole thing upside down. Everything is different. Everything is new, and their senses, every one of their senses, is assaulted by novelty and difference. Picture us aboard the Empress, sailing up the Peiho River and settling in at what we're told is Huangpo Island. The crew has to struggle to try to tame this foreign vocabulary, this foreign language. So they translate the Peiho River into the Pearl River, and they morph Huangpo Island into Whampoa Island. And the Empress is sailing up the Peiho or Pearl River. She's maneuvering between thousands and thousands of these egg-shaped sampans and crab boats and the serpentine dragon boats that are absolutely cramming the river. Canton, the destination of not the ship itself, she'll settle in at Whampoa Island, but 12 miles upriver is Canton, their destination, the jewel they seek to find. This is a city of a million voices, creating a roar and a sensory onslaught that actually must have intimidated the Yankees. Remember, Boston at this time is about 15,000 people. Philadelphia holds maybe 30, 40,000 people. Canton is a million.
Wow.
And as they sail upriver, they record that they are gazing at the greenest fields they have ever seen, miles and miles and miles on either side of the ship of what they call pata fields, rice paddies, and banana farms. And they're all, this landscape is just wafting the most exotic, pungent aromas up to them. Well, you asked about the reception they received, and as to the Chinese reception, the imperial officials of the Qing government and the Hong merchants, Chinese merchants with whom they'll do business, don't exactly know quite what to make of the Americans. They've never seen Americans before. They have never heard of the United States or America. And so Shaw records that the Chinese styled us the new people and the flowery flag people. This reception doesn't stop with the arrival of the Empress of China. Imagine this scene repeated again and again and again over decades as Americans fly the Stars and Stripes in the harbors of Calcutta and Bombay and Madras, at Bencoolen in Sumatra, in Japan, eventually, and all around the world. Wonderfully telling story when the USS George Washington, this is a U.S. Navy ship, not a merchant ship, first lands at Constantinople in 1800. And the Turks use the same term that the Chinese had termed. They call the Americans the new people. And so you are aboard any of these ships. You are very much one of the new people from a very new nation. And your driving concern is, in Samuel Shaw's words, the reception our citizens will meet. How will we be treated by Europeans and by other peoples?
How did they overcome the language barrier between English and Chinese? It's not even the same alphabet.
So they do then what we do today. They use what's called a pidgin English. Pidgin is a corruption of the word business, and so they use a business or pidgin English. And they learn as much Chinese as they can, but imperial regulations prohibit any Chinese person from teaching a Westerner and what they call an outside barbarian or a Fenghua Chinese language, any of the dialects. So what the merchants are, they're required to hire a fellow called a linguist. And I say fellow because it's always a man. They hire a linguist or translator whose English skills are always suspect, at least as described in the American writing. But they manage to converse through this pidgin English, some Chinese, some English, but also some words from India, some words from Sumatra, some words from Indonesia. It's really a pastiche of languages that they carve out.
Interesting. Now, one aspect of the experience that we have yet to talk about is whether or not the Americans accomplished their goal. In True Yankees, Dane claims that one of the goals of the trade mission for Samuel Shaw and other Yankees who would follow him was not just to secure profitable trade, but to secure recognition from European nations. Early American voyagers to the South Seas wanted Europeans to recognize the United States as an equal nation. Dane, did the voyagers secure this recognition, and if so, when? And what exactly does being the equal of a European nation mean?
Wow, complicated question. Complicated in part because of the duration of things. As I suggested earlier, Liz, the process continues throughout this entire 60-year period of what is conventionally called the Old China Trade. It is repeated with every new port an American vessel reaches. But I think we can safely say that the Americans are satisfied with the reception they meet by the end of the first generation. So around 1800, 1810, you really see in the writing of the China traders, you see in their writing a confidence that you don't see at the beginning of this whole period, this whole process. And what they're looking for is, as Shaw says, they want respect personally and nationally. That is, personally, as merchants going out into the world, they want to come into a strange port and be welcomed, but they want to find people they can do business with. And for an American coming 300 years after the Europeans had first landed these places, that means finding some Europeans who will show them the ropes, and finding some local people, Banyans in India, compradors and home merchants in China, who are willing to work with them. Otherwise, they're not going to make a profit, and the voyage is a loss. Nationally, they want respect or regard, what they call politeness and civility shown to them. And you find these words, politeness and civility, laced through all of these journals and ship's logs and diaries and books. But they want national legitimacy, and that means that when an American ship comes into a foreign port, flying the Stars and Stripes, that the other ships will boom their cannon out. 13, of course, was the appropriate number for the 13 new states at this time. That commodores will send invitations to dinner that the other merchants will invite them to see their shops, their factories or trading posts. That they will be treated as equals in what they called the community of civilized nations. It's a bit ironic because remember that you'll know this well, Liz, is that nobody goes into the American Revolution, the War for Independence, in search of equality. They go in search of liberty, loosely construed in Jefferson's language as property rights. But scholars like David Hackett Fisher and Fred Anderson have shown nicely that the experience of participation in the Continental Army and Continental Navy morphed the goals of the revolution, and you've got working class men, lower middle class men, now seeking equality. Well, after the war, it's this kind of equality within, again, what they call the community of civilized nations that the American sea captains and supercargoes are seeking.
And it also seemed from your book that they're seeking to learn more about themselves as Americans. What is it about, how do they define their American identity? Can you tell us, what early Americans learned from this trade about themselves?
So I think we all are familiar with the experience of travel to other parts of the country, travel abroad, and it's in navigating ourselves between other peoples that we really get a clearer sense of who we are as a people. The Americans, like Samuel Shaw, Mesa Delano, Robert Bennett Forbes, they invent a language of identity, if you will. They start to use terms like enterprising, and they're very clear in how they are making these discoveries. Mesa Delano, Edmund Fanning, the others will write, we're not like the Europeans. We're not here to conquer. We're here only to trade. We come in peace, and we come in the spirit of the Enlightenment. That's the subtext. In the spirit of the Enlightenment, they come to learn about other peoples and to educate themselves. And they say, we're not like the Europeans in this sense. We're more open. We treat other people with more candor and respect. We're not haughty like the Europeans. And yet, at the same time, at the other end of the civilizational spectrum that they imagine, they can say, well, we're not like the Sumatrans. They're barbaric. They're savage. They're pirates. I think Greg Fleming would appreciate this construction. And we're not like the Chinese. Yes, their empire is 1,000 years old, and it's quite a wonder that they're able to bring order to millions and millions and millions of people, but they do it with a heavy hand. They do it with a tyrannical glove. This regime is oppressive, and the people are not truly free. And so, again, you get this kind of metaphor of navigation, but navigating an identity between what they see as a decadent Europe and a barbaric East.
So by coming into contact with these other people in this trade, they're able to see what they are not and better help them define what they are with those experiences.
It's all about the encounters, and it's all about how they write about the encounters that contributes to a construction of national identity. It is not, and I should take pains to say this, it is not the only construction of national identity that is being flouted during this period. John Cox has written a wonderful book on national identity constructed in the South. There are competing contributions to this construction of national identity. But I think what is intriguing in this study and what is also understudied in this China trade literature is how very popular it was. The folks I've studied and taken hail from New England, but but they sail out of New York. Shaw and Fanning sail out of New York. Delano and Forbes out of Boston, Harriet Lowe out of Boston and Salem. But the literature they write is intended to be an American literature. And the identity they're constructing is a national identity. And so when they use the term Yankee, it's not constructed in the regional sense of North versus South versus West, but Yankee, a term, when that term is carried, when it's exported abroad, the Chinese look at Yankees as a national identity, and the British look at Yankees as a national identity. And so the traits they're describing are enterprise, our sense of adventure, our can-do spirit, is seen as a national trait. And if I may, to give you a fuller answer to your question, the next book is going to look at 4 components of this national figure, this true Yankee. One of the themes that you see running through their writing is the theme of the American or Yankee as a kind of Poor Richard. You find terms like and anecdotes that espouse the Americans. Can-do spirit, his inventiveness, his ability to re-rig a ship at sea, for instance, something no European traveler has ever tried before. They're frugal. They are careful investors. They're careful of the owner's money. Another persona is the Yankee Doodle, very patriotic, very nationalist, and in the themes, that you see in these anecdotes, you see Americans rescuing Europeans, English from Spanish jails, for instance, or rescuing Delano's so-called rescue of African slaves from the hands of the Spanish. Neville will make something of this later. The American fights for the honor and dignity of the Stars and Stripes. He fights for respect, but he's also a kind of hero of the world, rescuing the impoverished and downtrodden from European hegemony. Another character is the citizen of the world, the tolerant, enlightened world traveler who engages in science and scientific discovery. You know, you think of the Stephen Maturin character in Master and Commander. That's a British version of the citizen of the world. And then, of course, last is the real Jonathan, the kind of authentic American, clumsy, comical, kind of goofy, but very sweet and very funny. The true Yankee, the American that comes out of the China trade literature, is really a compilation of these 4 personas. But again, I want to underscore, this is just one contribution to the formation of a national identity.
And certainly some of these characteristics we carry forth and look upon ourselves as Americans today, such as enterprising, citizens of the world, open-minded. Is there any other legacy of this early United States trade with China that persists and informs our present-day trade with China?
Well,
I know I'm asking a more of a current events question of a historian, so I'm sorry to put you on the spot like that.
That's all right. It's very hard to do this work and not imagine where it brings us today. So I would say that this nascent, this emerging relationship between America and the world, continuing into the 21st century, remains a dance. Sometimes elegant, often awkward, always debated. Consider 2 relatively recent statements from well-known politicians. In an important, significant speech early in his tenure, Barack Obama asserts, "We are citizens of the world." In response, from the other end of the political spectrum, Newt Gingrich, insists he is not a citizen of the world at all. He is a citizen of America. And American interests not only dominate, they're the only interests we should consider. So I think in terms of legacy, I think the relationship between America and the world, I think our encounters with the rest of the world remain, in Robert Morris's words, experimental. I think we continue to fret over how we will be treated nationally and personally, and we continue to try to innovate and invent a relationship that we think is fair and proper and that recognizes our legitimacy.
Interesting. Well, we have just a few minutes left, which means it is time for the time warp.
The time warp. Historians can't predict the future, but they can speculate about what might have been.
This is a fun segment of the show where we ask you a hypothetical history question about what might have happened if something had occurred differently or if someone had acted differently. Are you ready for the time warp, Dane?
I'm braced, Liz.
Okay, here we go. In your opinion, what might have happened if Robert Morris had not found the funding to send the Empress of China to Asia in 1784? Would the United States have still forged this distant trade relationship in the late 1700s? Would the later founding of the trade have affected the development of American identity? And if so, how?
Oh, the same thing. Someone else would have done so. And just at that time, you have up and down the East Coast, you've got merchants in New York and Baltimore, in Charleston and Portsmouth, who are reading Captain James Cook's journals. They're reading Ledyard. They're reading about these promises of plump markets of luxury goods in Canton and storehouses of furs on the northwest coast. At the moment that Morris is planning his voyage, you've got Isaac Sears in New York planning an experimental voyage to the Cape of Good Hope. You've got Elias Heskett Derby in Salem planning voyages beyond Good Hope. Other merchants in Philadelphia, they're all organizing voyages to China and India. In fact, a month after the Empress sails from New York, she sails on Washington's birthday, February 22nd, 1784. A month later in March, another merchant ship, the United States, departs Philadelphia. Her course is set for Canton. For unknown reasons, she's diverted to India. So at the moment when the Empress of China is doing business in Canton, the United States is doing business in Bombay, I believe it was. And so the voyage of the Empress of China is a representative one. It is simply the first of a host of voyages that are about to wend their way east. And so the timing would not have been a whole lot different. What is different, I think, is that you don't have a lot of reporting from the decks of the United States in India. What is different and significant, I think, is the personage of Samuel Shaw, the figure of Shaw, because Shaw is very self-consciously aware of the significance of the voyage, of the historic meaning of the voyage. As soon as Shaw returns, and this begins the book, as soon as Shaw reaches New York in May of 1785, we find him sitting at a borrowed desk in a counting house in New York, maybe a boarding house in New York, and he's writing a letter to the foreign minister, John Jay, about, quote, the reception our citizens have met. And I think Shaw really sets a tone in how we think about these voyages and the need to write about them and convey the meaning of these voyages to the American people. It's decidedly not in New England literature. It's decidedly in American literature intended for a broadly American audience.
Very interesting. And I know you said earlier that your next research project is on a continued study of American identity. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Well, Yes. Frankly, lately I've been doing a lot of deep reading into Pokemon and Tintin with my 8-year-old junior faculty member here, Amy Abigail Alexander Morrison, and she has some new discoveries for me just about every day. But in the time I have left over from her research, I'm about halfway through the next book. Eastward of Good Hope is the working title. And what I want to do is really look at this China trade literature as a distinctive aspect of the print culture of the early republic. I want to get into the mindset of these mariners as writers and ask, who were their audiences? What exactly was the intent of publishing a book personally and nationally? How did a working class fellow like Mesa Delano or Edmund Fanning acquire the education to not only keep journals, but actually publish books? And how is it that they kept glowing this revolutionary fervor, this Enlightenment sensibility, long after their voyages were over? So I'm Eastward of Good Hope will really focus on the print culture of the China trade.
Great. I'm looking forward to that project already. Where is the best place to look for more information about you, your work, and how to get in contact with you?
So I'm a newbie here. I'm lately come to the technology. I do have a blog called True Yankees that I need to contribute to much more than I do. I'm on Twitter, and also the Salem State History Department website has me on there as well. And I would love to hear from people. I'd love to hear people's responses to True Yankees and hear their thoughts about these early American encounters overseas.
Well, we'll make it easy for people because we'll include all of the links to where they can contact you in the show notes page for this episode.
Well, thank you, Liz. Thank you for this opportunity.
And thank you, Dane. Thank you for joining us here on Ben Franklin's World. Undertaking a late 18th century voyage to China from the United States did not prove an easy feat. It took large amounts of money, preparation, fortitude to experience new cultures, and patience. Can you imagine being on board a ship for 6 months before you reached your final destination? It is also fascinating to think about the ways that early Americans' experience in the old China trade have affected our understanding, interaction, and our present-day trade with China. The governance of China has changed a lot in the last 230 years, and I guess so has the governance of the United States for that matter. But some of the legacies of this early trade persist, such as our penchant for comparing the characteristics of our national identity with those who have a different national identity. You can find more information about Dane, his book True Yankees, plus everything we talked about today on the show notes page for this episode, which you'll find at benfranklinsworld.com/012. I would greatly appreciate it if you would take the time to rate this podcast, because your rating will help us keep Ben Franklin's World visible and findable for new people. And your constructive comments will also help me improve the show. To rate and review Ben Franklin's World, a podcast about early American history, just visit benfranklinsworld.com/iTunes or benfranklinsworld.com/Stitcher. Finally, if you could invite any person from history to dinner, who would you invite and why? Please share your answers with me via tweet at Liz Covart or email liz@benfranklinsworld.com.
And remember, never leave till tomorrow that which you can do today.